He wore the uniform by day, the badge, the gun, the authority. But by night, he became the very predator people feared most. In the 1970s, Florida was haunted by a man who swore an oath to protect. Instead, he used that power to hunt. His name was Gerard John Schaefer, a deputy sheriff, a sadistic serial killer. And this is the story of how one cop terrorized a city and how justice almost slipped through the cracks. The small town of Florida with palm trees swaying, children riding bikes, the hum of church bells. This was the beauty of Florida's small town. It was 1972 in Martin County, Florida. A small community where people trusted the men in uniform, where a sheriff's badge meant safety, order, protection, and where one young deputy was building a reputation for being ambitious, sharp, and perhaps a little too eager. Gerard Schaefer was 26 years old. Tall, square-jawed, smiling stiffly, eyes sharp but cold, the image of law and order. But beneath the crisp uniform was something else. Something darker. Long before he wore the badge, Schaefer had disturbing fantasies of control, bondage, domination. And now, with the authority of the sheriff's office, he had the perfect cover to act on them. And in the months leading to his exposure, he began testing just how far he could go. Before his crimes became public, there were already warning signs. In late 1971, Schaefer pulled over to teenage hitchhikers along Highway 70. He flashed his badge, told them it was dangerous to walk alone. Then he offered them a ride. Though the two girls were nervous in the back of a patrol car, glancing at each other, they journeyed along trusting they were in safe hands. But instead of taking them home, he drove them to a remote dirt road. He told them he could teach them a lesson about danger. He forced them out of the car, made them kneel by the swamp, and brandished his service weapon. He bound their hands with twine. He threatened to leave them there. Hours later, he suddenly changed his mind. He let them go, warning them never to hitchhike again. Too afraid of the badge, too terrified of retaliation, the girls never reported the incident. They thought no one would believe them. And so, Schaefer's secret remained safe. In early 1972, another young woman vanished, a college student named Lee Bonsteel. She had been seen leaving campus with a man in a patrol car. Witnesses described the officer as tall, with dark hair. It was Schaefer. Lee's body was never found. But her disappearance added to a string of missing women in the area, disappearances that seemed random, until later, when Schaefer's journals revealed he had been hunting long before anyone realized. Schaefer will whisper to himself, "The girls never knew it was coming." That was the fun. What a heartless statement. By July of 1972, Schaefer's confidence had grown. This time, he chose Pamela Wells, 17, and Nancy Trotter, 18. Both were bright, free-spirited girls. Pamela dreamed of becoming a nurse. Nancy wanted to be a teacher. They were ordinary teenagers with futures ahead of them. But that day, fate placed them in the path of Deputy Schaefer. Schaefer offered them a ride. He warned them about the dangers of hitchhiking. He promised to take them somewhere safe. But his version of safe was something out of a nightmare. Instead of safety, Schaefer drove them to a remote swamp. There, he tied them to trees, gagged them, and threatened their lives. He told them he would teach them a lesson. He left them bound, terrified, but promised to return. What Schaefer didn't know was that this time, his arrogance would betray him. When Schaefer returned to the swamp later that day, the girls were gone. They had managed to escape and ran straight to the police. They described in chilling detail what the deputy had done to them. And in an extraordinary twist, the predator was now exposed by his own victims. Schaefer was immediately arrested. He was charged with false imprisonment, assault, and abuse of power. The sheriff suspended him. The case seemed open and shut. But here's the part that still chills investigators today. If Pamela and Nancy hadn't escaped, they almost certainly would have been killed. And they wouldn't have been the first. Florida courtroom, early 1970s. The air heavy, people fanning themselves with folded newspapers. This was in 1973. Gerard John Schaefer finally stood trial. Not as Deputy Schaefer, not as a protector of the community, but as a predator. The charges: the murders of 17-year-old Susan Place and 16-year-old Georgia Jessup, two bright girls whose lives ended in a nightmare. Susan was an artist. She loved to sketch sunsets over the beach. Georgia had dreams of becoming a teacher, following in her mother's footsteps. They weren't runaways. They weren't lost girls. They were daughters. And Schaefer had reduced them to bones buried in a swamp. When the grieving mother entered the witness stand, clutching a photograph of her daughter, her voice breaking, she muttered, though audibly, she was supposed to go to a concert that night. "I told her to be safe. That was the last thing I said to her. And then she never came home." The families spoke of birthdays missed, of empty seats at holidays, of the pain of not even knowing where their daughters were buried until detectives stumbled across shallow graves that matched Schaefer's own sadistic writings. But it wasn't just Schaefer on trial. It was the system. A sheriff's deputy had been allowed to prey on women under the very color of law. He flashed his badge to lure them in. He used his authority to silence them. And when the first signs of abuse surfaced, when he harassed, intimidated, and even abducted young women, the system hesitated. They suspended him. They warned him. But they didn't stop him. Not until two bodies were already in the ground. The shield of authority had protected him far too long. And now, the courtroom demanded justice. On October 25, 1973, the jury returned its verdict: guilty. Gerard John Schaefer was sentenced to life terms in prison. He smirked as the sentence was read, showing no remorse, no regret. To him, the trial was a performance. To the families, it was a wound that would never fully heal. Mothers of his victims held hands in the gallery, tears streaming down their cheeks as reporters scribbled furiously to get news for their platforms. The badge that once gave him power was stripped away. But the scars he left on families, and on the trust of an entire community, would last forever. Gerard Schaefer used his uniform as a mask, his badge as bait, his authority as a weapon. To his victims, he was not a protector. He was the danger, the wolf in plain sight. For the families, the verdict brought a measure of justice. But it could never bring back Susan, or Georgia, or the countless others who may have fallen into Schaefer's hands. The numbers in his journals hinted at more, dozens more. Some whose names we may never know. Some whose bones may still lie undiscovered in Florida swamps. The case of Gerard Schaefer is not just a story of murder. It's a warning. A reminder that justice must never bow to the shield of authority. That when those sworn to protect use their power to prey, the system must act swiftly, fearlessly, without hesitation. Because every day of silence, every delay, costs lives. He wore the uniform by day. But by night, he was the killer cop. And as night falls, we remember the victims, not the badge. Because their lives, their stories, their names are the only justice that truly matters. This has been Crime Scene Chronicles. What do you think? How many victims did Gerard Schaefer truly claim? And how do we prevent predators from hiding behind the shield? Comment your thoughts below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, because every victim deserves to be remembered. And every story deserves to be told.